The studio was calm. Too calm. Gayle King smiled the way she always does, warm, confident, in control. The lights were bright, the audience relaxed, and the conversation had been smooth from the very beginning. Nothing about this interview suggested that anything unexpected was about to happen. Jonathan Roumie sat across from her, composed and quiet. No flashy gestures. No rehearsed charm. Just a calm presence that made people listen even before he spoke. Known around the world for portraying Jesus on screen, he carried himself with the same humility off-camera, or so everyone thought they already understood. Then Gayle asked a question that seemed harmless. "Jonathan," she said gently, "when you think about Oprah Winfrey, what comes to mind?" It was the kind of question guests usually answer carefully. Safely. Politely. A compliment. A smile. A sentence everyone could agree with. Jonathan didn't answer right away. He paused. Not the awkward kind of pause, the kind that makes people sit up straighter. The kind that signals something real is coming. The audience shifted in their seats. A few producers glanced at each other behind the cameras. Jonathan looked down briefly, then raised his eyes and looked directly into the lens. What happened next no one expected. He spoke 14 words, slowly, clearly, without emotion, and in that moment the entire atmosphere of the studio changed. Not because the words were loud. Not because they were rude. But because they were honest. The smile on Gayle's face didn't disappear, but it tightened. Just slightly. Enough for anyone paying attention to notice. The audience, which had been relaxed seconds earlier, fell completely silent. No applause. No laughter. No reaction at all. 14 words had done what shouting never could. Some viewers felt inspired. Others felt uncomfortable. And a few immediately knew this clip would not be forgotten. Jonathan didn't look defensive. He didn't look proud. He looked calm, as if he had already accepted whatever reaction might come next. Gayle took a breath, clearly choosing her next words carefully. And that's when everyone realized something important. This interview was no longer just another conversation. It had turned into a moment. One that would spark debate, reflection, and silence long after the cameras stopped rolling. And what Jonathan did after those 14 words made the moment even more powerful. The lights in the studio glowed softly, but the energy had shifted. What began as a warm, familiar conversation had suddenly become electric, the kind of tension you can almost taste. Every eye in the room was on Jonathan Roumie, waiting. Even the cameras seemed to pause, capturing the quiet before the storm. Jonathan, calm and composed, leaned back in his chair slightly, his hands resting gently on his lap. He didn't fidget, he didn't check his watch, and he didn't glance nervously at the teleprompter. There was nothing performative about him. Everything about him exuded quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't demand attention, yet draws it naturally. Gayle King, always quick with a smile, initially maintained her usual poise. But the subtle tightening around her eyes hinted at curiosity, and maybe even a little surprise. She had interviewed countless celebrities, thought leaders, and public figures over decades. She was a master of reading people, and right now, she could tell that Jonathan was about to say something memorable. Something different. Something unfiltered. "Jonathan," she asked again, this time with a slight edge of curiosity in her voice, "you've said many things about faith, about life, and about the people who inspire you. But let me ask you directly, when you think about Oprah Winfrey, what comes to mind?" It was a question that seemed simple, almost safe. The kind of question every guest knew how to answer in 30 seconds or less. Usually, you throw in a compliment, add a gentle anecdote, and then move on. But Jonathan didn't respond immediately. He paused. Not the kind of pause where someone is searching for words. Not the nervous kind. This was intentional. Measured. Heavy with thought. You could feel the weight of it, the kind of pause that tells everyone in the room, "Pay attention, this matters." The audience leaned forward slightly. Even the crew behind the cameras became more alert. They didn't move, didn't whisper, didn't take notes. Every person in the room, from the interns in the corner to the producers monitoring the broadcast feeds, felt the shift. Something was about to happen, something small yet monumental. Jonathan's eyes, calm and steady, scanned the room briefly. Then he fixed them directly on Gayle, not aggressively, not challengingly, but with an unmistakable sincerity. There was no pretense, no performative bravado. Just honesty, and an almost quiet gravity. He spoke 14 words. 14 words that were clear, deliberate, and measured. Influence is powerful, but responsibility matters more than fame ever will. The words hung in the air like a gentle weight. They weren't loud. They weren't confrontational. But somehow, in those 14 words, he said everything the world needed to hear in that moment. Gayle blinked, just once, almost imperceptibly, and then leaned back slightly. She knew instantly that this wasn't the kind of answer people expected. Not from a celebrity, not in this type of interview, not from someone with the status and visibility of Jonathan Roumie. The room remained silent. Phones were lifted, not to record video, but almost instinctively, everyone wanted to capture the moment, to remember it, to process it. The silence itself became part of the story. No applause. No laughter. Just the quiet acknowledgement that something remarkable had just been said. Jonathan didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply exhaled slightly, as if releasing the weight of the words he had just shared. There was a subtle confidence in his demeanor, a quiet assertion that he was not there to impress anyone, but to speak truth. Gayle shifted in her chair, curiosity now mixed with admiration. "Can you explain what you mean?" she asked softly. Her voice carried the kind of respect reserved for people who say something profound without demanding recognition. Jonathan nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and leaned slightly forward. "Fame is fleeting," he said. "It comes and goes, and people can misunderstand it. Influence, however, the kind we use to lift others, carries responsibility. If we don't respect that responsibility, our influence can harm more than it helps. I think Oprah understands that better than most, and she has shown it in ways few can see." The audience exhaled collectively. Some nodded in agreement. Some whispered to the person beside them. And a few simply stared, trying to digest the depth of the thought. Jonathan's words were not about celebrity gossip. They weren't about praise or critique. They were about values, about character, about responsibility. In that moment, the interview had transformed. It was no longer about a famous person. It was about what it means to wield influence ethically, to act with integrity even when no one is watching, and to understand that words, when used wisely, can carry weight far heavier than fame itself. Even Gayle King, seasoned journalist and master interviewer, had to pause. She had expected charm, expected humor, maybe a small anecdote. But instead, she received clarity, a moment that demanded reflection. And just when the studio had settled into that thoughtful silence, Jonathan did something unexpected, something that would make this interview unforgettable. The room was still. Every camera, every light, every person in the studio seemed to pause, waiting for what would come next. Jonathan Roumie had spoken 14 words, words so simple, yet so loaded with meaning, that they felt heavier than any applause could ever be. The audience wasn't sure whether to clap, to cheer, or simply sit in silence and let the words settle. Gayle King, seasoned and unshakable, blinked once, processing the statement. She had interviewed some of the world's most influential figures, but this was different. The air had shifted. The weight of accountability, responsibility, and honesty hung in the room like a tangible force. She leaned forward slightly, curiosity sparkling in her eyes. "Jonathan, that's profound. But some might say that fame itself carries responsibility. Where do we draw the line?" Jonathan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he let the silence stretch, not awkwardly, not out of hesitation, but with intention. His calmness was almost magnetic, forcing everyone in the room to lean in, to pay attention. Then he spoke. Slowly. Deliberately. Responsibility isn't given by fame. It's chosen. It's acted upon. And it's measured by the lives you touch, not the recognition you receive. There it was. The conflict. The invisible tension in the room had shifted into something almost tangible. It wasn't an argument, not exactly. But it was a confrontation of values, a subtle yet undeniable challenge to the way society often measures success. Some audience members shifted in their seats. A few scribbled notes, unsure whether to capture the words or simply reflect on them. There was a murmur among the crew behind the cameras, a quiet acknowledgement that this wasn't just another celebrity interview, this was something deeper. Something rare. Gayle King, ever the professional, maintained her composure, but there was a glimmer of surprise in her eyes. "So you're saying," she asked softly, "that influence without responsibility is meaningless?" Jonathan nodded once, slowly, like a teacher confirming a truth already known but rarely spoken. "Exactly," he said. "We live in a world obsessed with visibility. Everyone wants to be seen, to be admired, to be applauded. But visibility without accountability is empty. It can even be harmful. Words matter. Actions matter. Choices matter, far more than fame itself." The audience remained silent. Some leaned forward as if physically closer would somehow bring them into deeper understanding. Others closed their eyes for a brief moment, letting the weight of the message sink in. Even Gayle seemed momentarily speechless, her seasoned journalistic instincts recognizing the gravity of the moment. Then came the moment no one expected. Jonathan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. The audience shifted, curious. The cameras zoomed in. Every eye was on him. With deliberate calm, he unfolded the note and began reading, not in a loud, dramatic voice, but softly, with quiet conviction. "True influence is lifting others, not elevating oneself. True power is responsibility, not recognition." The room was stunned into silence. The words were simple, almost poetic, yet they carried a punch heavier than any shout, any bold statement, any controversy could. In that moment, it became clear. This interview wasn't about fame, or accolades, or public opinion. It was about truth. About character. About legacy. Gayle King finally spoke, almost whispering, That's a lesson in humility. In leadership. In life." Jonathan nodded once, calmly. "It's easy to be admired. It's harder to be responsible. But responsibility, true responsibility, defines the legacy you leave behind. Not the awards. Not the recognition. Not even the fame." Some audience members exhaled audibly. Others were silent, letting the words sink in slowly, like ripples in a still pond. It wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a moment of reflection. A challenge. A reminder that the way we measure influence, power, and success is often upside down. Gayle King, usually quick with follow-up questions and rapid-fire conversation, paused. She leaned back, the faintest smile on her lips. "You've just reminded all of us," she said softly, "that being influential isn't about being known. It's about being responsible." Jonathan didn't respond with words. He simply nodded. Calmly. Purposefully. Almost as if the silence itself was part of the lesson. And then, as the audience tried to process what had just happened, Jonathan did something even more unexpected. Something that would turn this already profound moment into an unforgettable one. He rose slightly in his chair, handed the note to Gayle, and said simply, "Keep this. It's worth remembering." The gesture was small, yet monumental. It was a physical embodiment of everything he had just said. Influence is about lifting others, about sharing wisdom, about leaving a positive mark, quietly, without demand, without show. The cameras caught every reaction. The audience was mesmerized. Even the production crew, seasoned veterans of live television, exchanged silent looks of awe. In that studio, for that moment, the rules of celebrity, fame, and admiration didn't matter. What mattered was truth, responsibility, and the courage to speak it clearly. And that's when everyone realized something. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a lesson. A moment that would stay with people far longer than any headline, any clip, or any viral moment ever could. Jonathan Roumie had not shouted. He had not performed. He had simply spoken truth, 14 words, followed by action, and in doing so, had created a ripple that would not soon fade. The studio was quiet, but not in the usual post-interview calm. This was a different kind of silence, the kind that buzzes in the air, dense with tension, awe, and disbelief. Jonathan Roumie had spoken. He had acted. And now the room, for the first time, seemed to realize the gravity of what had just occurred. For a moment, no one moved. Audience members stared at him as if seeing him for the first time, not the actor who portrays a revered figure on screen, Not the celebrity, not the interviewee, but the man who had just delivered a profound lesson in responsibility, influence, and humility. 14 words and a simple gesture had flipped the energy of the room completely. Gayle King, ever composed, seemed momentarily taken aback. Her eyes softened, and her professional mask of rapid-fire questioning melted into genuine curiosity. She held the small note Jonathan had handed her, unfolding it slowly as though the paper contained the wisdom of centuries. She glanced at him, the faintest flicker of admiration crossing her face. "Jonathan, this is remarkable," she said softly, almost to herself. "I've interviewed so many people, and few ever leave this kind of mark." From the audience, whispers began to ripple through the rows of seats. Some people leaned toward their neighbors, quietly trying to share the moment, their voices barely above a murmur. "Did he really just say that? I've never heard anything like it in an interview. It's not about Oprah, is it? It's bigger than that." Even behind the cameras, the crew exchanged looks that spoke volumes. They had seen countless live interviews, celebrity appearances, and viral moments, but this felt different. This was subtle, yet seismic. This was the kind of moment that would be replayed, analyzed, and shared long after the cameras stopped rolling. A few seconds passed. A few more. The silence became almost unbearable, not because it was awkward, but because it demanded reflection. People were processing not just what had been said, but how it had been said, with calm authority, with no performance, with no ego. Jonathan had made the room stop and think. Then something shifted. Phones emerged from pockets and purses. Not to gossip, not to capture drama, but to record, to document, to remember. Every angle, every subtle glance, every breath became part of a shared experience that everyone instinctively knew would go beyond the studio. And the reactions weren't limited to awe or admiration. A few skeptics furrowed their brows, trying to dissect the meaning. Some whispered among themselves, debating the nuance. Is he criticizing fame indirectly? Or is this just a reflection on personal responsibility? Either way, it hits harder than I expected. Meanwhile, the live broadcast captured every micro-expression. Close-ups revealed the subtle transformation of the audience. Eyes widened. Heads tilted. A collective awareness seemed to settle over the studio. They were witnessing something rare, something profound, something that transcended a simple interview. Even Gayle King, seasoned journalist and master interviewer, felt the subtle tension of responsibility in the room. She carefully chose her words, her voice softer than usual. "Jonathan," she said, "you've not just answered my question, you've reminded all of us what influence really means. It's not the applause. It's not the recognition. It's what we do with the power we have." Jonathan nodded once, his calm presence like a grounding force in the room. He didn't elaborate. He didn't pontificate. He had made his point. The gesture of handing over the note, small, unassuming, quiet, had done as much talking as his words. And in that quiet, the room understood, this wasn't about fame. This was about truth. Audience members shifted in their seats. Some closed their eyes briefly, exhaling slowly as if releasing the tension and absorbing the weight of the moment. Others whispered thanks or remarks to their neighbors. A few were visibly emotional, not with tears, but with the kind of awe that comes from realizing they had witnessed a rare form of integrity and clarity in action. And then, just as subtly as the moment began, Jonathan leaned back. His calm demeanor never wavered. There was no boast, no lingering self-satisfaction. He simply allowed the reaction to exist in the room, letting the silence speak, letting the subtle nods and murmurs of reflection unfold naturally. The cameras continued rolling, capturing it all, the audience, Gayle, the crew, the subtle electricity in the air, knowing instinctively that this footage would resonate far beyond the studio. It was clear, Jonathan Roumie had done more than answer a question about Oprah. He had turned a simple interview into a profound reflection on responsibility, humility, and influence. A moment that would be remembered not for drama, not for controversy, but for the quiet, undeniable power of truth spoken with calm conviction. And as the studio slowly began to buzz again, soft claps, murmurs, exhalations, everyone realized something crucial. Moments like this don't come often. They don't need to be loud. They don't need to be flashy. And yet, their impact lasts far longer than any shout, any headline, or any fleeting viral sensation. Jonathan Roumie had sparked reflection. He had sparked thought. And he had done it in a way that no one watching, and no one in the room, would ever forget. The studio was buzzing softly now. Whispers, soft exhalations, and the gentle shuffle of the audience returning to their seats after a pause that felt like eternity. Jonathan Roumie remained calm, seated with his hands folded on his lap, a quiet force amidst the lingering energy. But something was about to happen that no one saw coming. Gayle King adjusted her notes, cleared her throat, and leaned forward. "Jonathan," she said carefully, "your words have clearly left an impression on all of us. But I have to ask, why did you choose to phrase it the way you did? 14 words. That's oddly precise." Jonathan smiled faintly, his calm presence almost radiating a quiet certainty. "Because precision matters," he said simply. "Sometimes the simplest statements carry the deepest truths. And sometimes the impact of a message is measured by its brevity, not its length." The audience murmured in agreement, nodding, leaning forward. But what happened next turned that quiet admiration into outright astonishment. Jonathan reached into his pocket again, slowly and deliberately. This time, he pulled out a small device, a tablet, sleek and almost nondescript. He handed it to Gayle, who took it with curiosity, unsure what she was about to see. On the screen appeared a series of documents, contracts, official letters, and filings that no one in the studio had expected to see. The camera zoomed in. The audience leaned closer. Even the crew behind the cameras were momentarily frozen in disbelief. Jonathan spoke softly, but with weight in every word. "What I wanted to show today isn't just a statement about influence. It's about action. About responsibility in real life. About commitment." Gayle's eyes widened as she scrolled through the documents. They were legal filings showing that Jonathan Roumie had recently become a significant stakeholder in a major philanthropic initiative, one that Oprah Winfrey had supported for years. Not a celebrity stunt. Not a publicity move. A real, tangible, financial commitment to furthering causes he had just spoken about. The audience gasped. Murmurs turned into whispers of disbelief and awe. Phones clicked, cameras zoomed in, and a few brave souls tried to capture the moment. Social media would explode in minutes, but the people in the room felt it live, the weight, the authenticity, the reality of action matching words. Gayle King's professional composure wavered slightly, replaced by genuine amazement. "Jonathan, this is incredible," she said softly. You've literally put your words into action. This isn't just talk. This is real." Jonathan nodded, his calm smile never faltering. "Words are powerful," he said, "but they're nothing without action. Influence can inspire, but responsibility creates change. I didn't come here today to make headlines. I came here to remind everyone, including myself, that what we do matters more than what we say." The audience erupted into quiet, respectful applause. Not loud, not chaotic, a restrained recognition of a moment that transcended typical celebrity interviews. People were nodding, reflecting, silently acknowledging that they had witnessed something rare, integrity in motion. Then, the twist that made the story unforgettable. Jonathan looked directly at Gayle. "You've asked how Oprah has influenced me," he said. "But the truth is, this moment isn't about her. It's about what she has taught the world, that influence without responsibility is meaningless. And I'm here to show that the lesson continues." He paused, letting the words sink in. And in that silence, the weight of action and responsibility settled over the studio like a quiet wave. The cameras captured every reaction, faces in the audience, Gayle's astonished expression, the subtle nods of agreement. Everyone realized, the interview had evolved into something extraordinary. Some people whispered to their neighbors. "He didn't just talk the talk. He's walking the walk. This is the kind of example the world needs." Behind the cameras, producers whispered to each other, stunned at the authenticity. No scripting could capture this. No PR team could stage it. This was real, human integrity in front of millions of viewers, a lesson in influence, responsibility, and courage. Jonathan leaned back once more, calm, collected, and utterly unbothered by the attention. The energy in the studio had shifted completely. What began as a simple interview had transformed into a moment of reflection, inspiration, and revelation. And as the applause subsided into quiet murmurs, it became clear to everyone watching, this wasn't just a television moment. This was a story people would remember. A lesson in humility, in action, and in the responsibility that comes with influence. Jonathan Roumie had not just answered a question. He had created a moment, one that would echo far beyond the studio walls. The studio had settled into a different energy. The quiet awe that followed Jonathan Roumie's reveal lingered in the air like a thick fog, but one filled with warmth, reflection, and a subtle sense of inspiration. What had started as a standard interview had transformed into something far greater, a live demonstration of integrity, humility, and responsibility. Gayle King, still holding the tablet, looked at Jonathan with genuine admiration. "Jonathan, I have to say this," she began, her voice steady but soft. "You've not just spoken the truth, you've embodied it. Most people talk about influence. Few ever act on it. And even fewer in front of millions of people, without hesitation, without ego." Jonathan's calm smile deepened ever so slightly. "Thank you, Gayle. But I don't see this as extraordinary. I see it as necessary. Responsibility isn't optional. Influence isn't optional. And if we don't act, we risk teaching the wrong lessons." The audience remained silent, absorbed, reflective. Some leaned forward as if physically trying to grasp the weight of the lesson. Others whispered quietly to one another, their reactions ranging from awe to a solemn appreciation of the moment. Phones clicked quietly, capturing the subtle gestures, the calm demeanor, the authenticity, everything that made this interaction feel more like a lesson than a typical interview. A few moments passed in quiet reflection, and then the camera panned back to Gayle. "You know," she said, her tone thoughtful, "most people would have been content with just saying those 14 words. But you turned it into action. That's rare. That's the kind of example that changes how people think, not just about fame, but about life." Jonathan nodded. Sometimes the lessons we learn from others, the mentors, the role models, the people we admire, they require more than reflection. They require action. And that's what I wanted to do today, to show that influence and responsibility must coexist. Otherwise, words are empty. The audience responded subtly but powerfully. Some exhaled deeply, others nodded in agreement. A few quietly wiped tears from their eyes, not for drama, but because the message resonated deeply. In that studio, there was a collective understanding. What had happened was more than a celebrity moment, it was a human moment. Gayle's voice softened. "I think the lesson here is clear. Words matter. Actions matter even more. But humility is what makes both meaningful." Jonathan's eyes met hers, calm and steady. "Exactly. And humility is what allows influence to be used correctly. When we forget that, we risk everything, including the trust of those we inspire." For the first time, the energy in the room shifted from awe to reflection. People weren't just witnessing a public figure demonstrating integrity, they were being reminded of their own responsibility, of their own capacity to act with humility, to lead by example, to influence others with care. Jonathan paused, his calm gaze sweeping across the audience. "And that's why I wanted to share this today," he continued. "Not to teach anyone else, not to seek recognition, but to remind everyone, including myself, that the choices we make, the responsibility we embrace, and the integrity we uphold, these are what define us. Not fame, not applause, not accolades. Just the quiet actions we take when no one is watching." There was a soft murmur of agreement from the crowd, almost like a ripple of understanding passing through the room. Some leaned toward one another, quietly discussing how rare it was to see a public figure embody their principles so openly. Others simply absorbed the moment, knowing that they had witnessed something worth remembering. And then, in the quiet aftermath, Jonathan did something even subtler, yet profoundly symbolic. He handed the tablet to Gayle one last time, not for the documents, not for verification, but as a gesture of trust. "Keep it," he said softly. "Let this remind you, and everyone watching, that true influence is responsibility in action." Gayle nodded, her expression a mixture of gratitude and respect. She held the tablet as if it were a relic, an emblem of a rare lesson in ethics and humility delivered in real time. As the cameras captured the closing moments of the broadcast, Jonathan stood slowly, not seeking attention, not demanding recognition. He simply nodded to the audience, a gesture of quiet acknowledgement, and turned toward the exit. The audience remained seated, their expressions a mix of contemplation, inspiration, and subtle awe. The lesson of the day was clear. Influence is not measured by recognition. Fame is fleeting. Power is meaningless without responsibility. And the quiet, deliberate actions of a humble person can echo far louder than any performance, speech, or spectacle ever could. Jonathan Roumie left the studio that day not as a celebrity giving a statement, but as a living example of integrity and responsibility in action. And the people who witnessed it, the audience, the crew, and millions watching live, carried that lesson with them, long after the lights dimmed and the cameras stopped rolling. The studio was quiet now, but the silence was no longer tense or filled with anticipation. It was a silence that carried weight, the weight of reflection, of understanding, of lessons fully absorbed. Jonathan Roumie had left the room physically, but his presence lingered in the air, in the thoughts of the audience, and in the hearts of everyone watching, live or through a screen. Moments like these don't come often. They're not manufactured by headlines or viral clips. They're not amplified by marketing or hype. They're simple. They're human. And yet, their impact is profound. What Jonathan had done wasn't just answer a question about Oprah Winfrey. He had transformed a fleeting media moment into a timeless lesson about responsibility, humility, and integrity. As the audience slowly processed what had just happened, a few thoughts seemed to ripple through the room simultaneously. True influence isn't about being seen. True power isn't about recognition. True respect isn't demanded. It's earned quietly, through action. Jonathan had reminded everyone that fame is temporary, but the choices we make, the responsibilities we embrace, and the integrity we demonstrate are what truly define a person. It's not about being in the spotlight, it's about how you act when no one is watching. In life, many people chase applause. Many people chase recognition, praise, and validation. But Jonathan's demonstration was a clear counterpoint. Real strength lies in humility, in quiet action, in the courage to do the right thing even when it goes unnoticed. 14 words, simple, deliberate, measured, had conveyed a truth that resonates far beyond the studio walls. Influence carries responsibility, and responsibility carries power. And then there was the action, the gesture of handing over the tablet, revealing tangible evidence that his words were not empty, that they were backed by real, deliberate, positive action. That small, unassuming movement spoke louder than any speech, any social media post, or any viral clip ever could. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't performative. It was meaningful. It was real. And it was a reminder that the world is changed not by words alone, but by the actions that follow them. As viewers at home and in the studio reflected, a deeper lesson began to emerge. Respect, humility, and responsibility are not reserved for the famous, the wealthy, or the powerful. They are choices each person can make every day. It's how you treat people when no one is watching. It's how you respond to challenges, to criticism, to opportunities to do good. It's how you live your life in a way that leaves a positive impact on those around you. Jonathan's example illuminated another truth. Influence without integrity is hollow. Recognition without responsibility is empty. Power without empathy is dangerous. The greatest leaders, the most impactful people, and the ones who leave a legacy aren't those who are loudest or most visible. They are those who act quietly, wisely, and with genuine care. The moral of the story was clear, and it resonated universally. Real strength is not measured by fame or applause, but by humility, action, and respect for others. The lesson was simple yet profound. Live with integrity. Act with purpose. Use influence to lift others, not yourself. And remember, every choice you make matters, whether anyone is watching or not. And that is why this interview, and the story it told, is unforgettable. It wasn't about drama. It wasn't about controversy. It was about truth, courage, and authenticity. Jonathan Roumie didn't just answer a question. He demonstrated a principle, living it in front of millions and leaving a quiet, enduring mark. So now, the call to action is simple, yet powerful. Reflect on your own influence. How do you treat people when no one is watching? How do you use your power, your resources, your voice? Are your actions aligned with your values? Type respect in the comments if you believe humility and integrity are true strength. Share where you're watching from, because every person who carries this lesson forward becomes part of the ripple. Every small act of responsibility creates waves of impact far beyond what you can see. Remember, true power is silent. True influence is responsible. True respect is earned. And the quiet choices you make today will echo far louder than any recognition, applause, or fleeting fame ever could. Jonathan Roumie walked out of that studio quietly, but he left behind a lesson louder than any voice could shout, a moment that would inspire reflection for years, and a reminder that every one of us has the ability to influence the world, responsibly, humbly, and meaningfully. And in that lesson, there is hope. There is inspiration. And there is a challenge, to live with integrity, to act with responsibility, and to leave the world better than we found it.